The Africa and African Diaspora Wits School of Governance, Wits Business School, along with various other partners, are hosting sessions based on the historical 1945 Manchester PanAfrican Conference to review the progress made since then. The conference also seeks to develop global strategies to change the discrimination faced by Africans and people of African descent globally. The conference is convened on the backdrop of the 20th anniversary of the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia and Related Intolerances. Conference spokesperson Reverend Frank Chikane joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Reverend, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and thank you to those who are watching the program.
Always good to talk to you, and it's a fascinating conference that you're putting together. And let's go back to 1945, perhaps, with the 1945 Pan-African Congress in Manchester. What happened there that was of landmark proportions that we are still talking about it even now?
Well, it was extraordinary because that is the conference where people like Kwame Nkrumah, Kenyatta, and others were in. And it is that conference which determined that decolonization must happen. It must happen irrespective of those who were colonizing them. Because in 1919, after the First World War, Africans and people of African descent fought with Western countries who said they are fighting for their freedom. But when the conference happened, Versailles in Paris, France, their representation were not taken. Freedom was not for people of African descent. And then the Second World War happened again. And then they were part of it. And they thought again it's about freedom, which is how they sell the Second World War. And afterwards, they could not even accommodate people of African descent as the United Nations was set up. You will recall, as South Africans, for instance, that Jan Smuts represented South Africa there. And we, as the oppressed, were not there. So this conference of Manchester was a critical conference, brought all the Pan-Africanists from different parts of the world, particularly North America, the Caribbean, Africa, to actually make a determination about their freedom. And from there on, it was like the gates had opened and Ghana became independent. And by the 60s, many of the African countries were free. The West Indies became free. So that conference was critical. So it's freedom politically. But what that conference, the decisions of that conference which were not fulfilled, it's economic liberation. And as long as if poverty is associated with people of color, people of African descent, then racism will never come to an end. That's why this conference is also associated with the 20th anniversary of the UN Conference on Racism. We are saying that the time has come that people of African descent come together and say to the world, we need our freedom, we need our conditions to change, and we need it now. And we're going to change the balance of forces in the world to make it not a choice for the powerful to let us be what we should be. I think that's really the issue. And then, of course, there was the issue about spirituality, which really has to do with the moral and ethical content of what we fought for. And those who took over in our independence were captive of the colonizers again, and they served their interests instead of saving Africa. And that's why we are still where we are today. So we are saying the time has come for all of us together. Former President Mbeki opened the conference, spoke at the opening of the conference yesterday. And he said we should not even say Africans and people of African descent. We are one people, people of African descent, and we are siblings, to put it in the words of one of the women participants in the pre-conference conference on Saturday, that we are all siblings. We are brothers and sisters. We need to work together. And that's why we have got people of African descent from Latin America, particularly Brazil and Colombia. As you know, Brazil has got the largest black population, people of African descent, than anywhere in the world except on the African continent. And so we've brought representatives from there. We've got representatives from the Caribbeans, North America, Europe, and we've got representatives from Asia and Oceania. Today, we had Dr. Yoteli from West Papua speaking. And tomorrow we'll be having somebody from the Dalit community who's going to come and speak. On Thursday, we're going to have somebody from the indigenous communities, because we are saying this is Pan-Africanism for all, in terms of those who were enslaved and then those who were colonized. And we even have representatives from the Palestine, because they also are seeking freedom. And I think that's really where we are. And I'm convinced this is the time for us to cause the change. And in the opening, I said yesterday, in the words of Bob Marley, that no one is going to liberate us except ourselves. And that this generation, in terms of Phenon, has a task. Either we fulfill our mission or we betray it. And this is what this conference is about. 600 plus people have registered, and we are meeting 2 to 5 o'clock virtually since Saturday until Friday.
So it's quite a task, I would say, because it's 76 years since Manchester, and the struggles have been similar at times, very different at times. When we compare maybe how things developed in South America, Brazil, as you say, the struggle in North America, Black Africans trying to get equal rights, and then decolonization on the continent. Different journeys, but I guess what we had in common was our origins and perhaps our source.
Well, the theme of the conference is our shared journey, past, present, and the future. That's the theme. And we have what the Pan-Africanists left us, Du Bois and others, is that we are siblings, we are of the same family, we are being brutalized as a family. We need to take on the world together. I think that's what it is about. In the last, there was lots of gain in terms of the 60s and into the 70s. But in the last few years, because of right-wing governments around the world, there is a reversal of the gains, and racism is taking its roots again in an extraordinary way. But we also are taking a stand. The UN conference on racism was one of those. And then you know that the African Union has declared the diaspora as the 6th region of the African Union, which means we see ourselves as one family. And following the anti-racism conference of the UN declared 2015-2024 as a decade of people of African descent, and they have formed a special forum on people of African descent. So there are battles all over and at all levels, and CARICOM, as you know, held a summit about 3 weeks ago with the AU. because the Caribbeans are the places where people of African descent govern themselves. And we think it's important to bring the UN, the AU, and CARICOM together. And so this is the moment when we can't lose this opportunity, a moment to change, to cause the change to happen. And I must say I'm inspired by the presentations at this conference. This is the third day, and I couldn't believe what we are able to achieve. We hope to come out with a program of action on Friday to say what are we going to do to achieve the objectives we have set up for ourselves. And there's a concept note that outlines exactly what our focus is.
So how will we help our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, particularly where they are minorities and that they're in countries and places where it's very difficult when you're a minority to get your voice heard? Perhaps we have a greater advantage on the African continent because we are the majority. How do we help those in the diaspora?
That's why solidarity is of critical importance. I mean, Sir Hilary Beckles, the Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies, spoke today and mapped out how people of African descent worked with Africans to decolonize the African continent, including the West Indies. And so what we are doing is to go back to our roots and say we need to act in solidarity with each other. Like, for instance, Black Lives Matter. It happened in the United States. People of African descent are a minority there. But that experience has become a global phenomenon, and people have taken on that struggle. But it's not only where people are in a minority, like, for instance, in some of the Asian countries. Take Brazil. I mean, Brazil, the statistics used to be about 60%. It should be in the 50s now. Of the population of Brazil is people of African descent. But you don't see much of them in government, in business. They've been suppressed because they ended up being slaves, and when they were freed, they were subjected to those experiences in Brazil. And so we're working with the Brazilians. I had meetings with them. They even think about setting up a black university because they feel they are discriminated against. And so we have to act in solidarity with one another. And that's why we brought somebody from West Papua, which is still really colonized because the West Papuans don't have the right to make decisions for themselves. And so we'll be getting people from the Pacific, for instance, who will be speaking. And so we are acting in solidarity with one another. Even on the African continent, for instance, I mean, we may be in the majority, but the governments are such that they are governing in the opposite direction. They are not actually on the route to get freedom for Africans and as well as economic freedom. And Sir Beckles today really talked something very painful to say. When they talk about reparations, they did not get support from some of the major African countries. And when I listen to them, it's a very painful experience. Yeah. They were kidnapped, used without being paid for about 400 years. You work like you are an ox that earns nothing except be given some grass to eat. And then when there was the freedom of the slaves, they left them there in those islands with nothing. And I think it's important, I mean, to really understand that we cannot allow this to continue. And this is where racism comes from, by the way.
All right. Perhaps finally, all of the external factors we're aware of and can deal with, but throughout history, sadly, sometimes we've been our own worst enemy because we've not always been united. And some people in the diaspora have not always felt connected to the continent, and we sometimes have distanced ourselves from them as well. How do we change that mindset? Because there's still some people that have to be brought into this story that we're all African, no matter where you are.
Yeah, it's consciousness, really. I mean, if you lived in a place where you don't even know there's something happening in the world, you would not be able to act in solidarity. Today, we're dealing with the subject of decolonizing the mind, because you have to decolonize the mind. You have to open up people's understanding and consciousness. And this is what this conference was doing today. I mean, I was amazed by the fact that, I mean, we had a speaker from the Caribbean, from the United States, from Latin America, from West Papua, and you know, and Europe. You don't normally have that with people breaking into groups, regions, and that's what we are about. We did it in South Africa. I always say there were many people had given up to apartheid. The level of consciousness was not there, and there we came in the early 70s with black consciousness, and ended up, you know, raising the consciousness of the people to resist the system. And I think the world needs to be made to stop and think about what they've done to black people in this world. Remember that, I mean, people talk genocide in various other places, but they never talk about genocide against people of African descent. People talk about reparations for other people, but they don't talk about reparations for people of African descent. So you can see the racist element in it, in its totality. And that's really what we need to end. It doesn't matter how much I, as Frank Chikane, you know, there are black billionaires, but when you step out, you are treated like a person of African descent and discriminated against. So money doesn't help. Is to change the conditions of all the people of African descent. And we must unite. Of course, Western countries divide us. At the anti-racism conference in Durban, they actually got some Africans against people of African descent. So you differ on the spot. Remember, some of the governments are really not free. They are being run by Western countries, Western powers, and other interests. And that's why we need to fight against that. We did it in South Africa. We can do it as people of African descent.
Reverend Frank Chikane, I wish I could talk for longer, but hopefully we can chat again soon after the conference concludes, and then you can share with us some of the outcomes. But thank you so much for giving us an update tonight. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you very much. I wish you would have also have time to talk to some of the delegates who come from the different places. It will be very interesting.
We will make a plan. We will make a plan. Thank you very much, Reverend Chikane.